Hi, my name is Carol Kostakos-Petranek. Today I'd like to talk with you about using United States records to find your immigrant ancestors' original surname and village of origin. We're going to start today by talking about immigration, naturalization, and alien registration records. The most important thing to know, rule number one, is the original surname of your ancestors. Many of them changed their names once they left Greece and came to the US. They may have shortened their names by cutting off the back of the name, such as changing Papayanakos to Pappas, or cutting off the front of the name, such as changing Alexandropoulos to Poulos. But they were very creative and came up with many other alternatives to their beautiful Greek names. Remember that there are many ways to spell a name phonetically, that it's very important that you write down any way that your name could possibly be spelled, depending on how it sounds, and use those variant spellings in the different databases that you're going to be searching. The second rule is that you have to know the exact village of origin. There are thousands of villages in Greece that have the same names. One of my villages is Ios Ioannis or St. John's. You can see here in Sparta, there are 3 villages with this name. Each of these villages has their records in a different location. Consequently, I not only have to know Ios Ioannis, but I have to know which Ios Ioannis near Sparta is my village. The reason these first 2 things are first is because obviously in the Greek records you're going to find the original surname written in Greek. There will be no anglicized, abbreviated, and certainly not a changed name in those records. The second thing is that records in Greece are maintained by locality. Each village has its own records. There could be many villages that have the same name as we just mentioned in St. John's or Ios Ioannis. And third, right now Greece does not have indexed online records where you can just put in a name and conduct a broad search for a surname. You have to be specific to the locality. So how do you get started? You start by searching and finding every US record that could possibly have been created for your people. Each record was created for a different purpose, therefore it asks different questions, therefore it will give you different clues. Today, let's start by talking about passenger ship records. The information in these records changed over the years. Before 1899, 1900, when many of our people started coming over, they asked for general information, such as your nationality, your birthplace, but that was really mainly the country, the age, the height, the hair color, the profession, and what's known as the place of last residence. Now, we need to be careful of this because the place of last residence may not have been their home village. They may have traveled to a different city, worked there for a while, and then got on the boat and came across the ocean. Starting in 1906, 1907, more specific information was asked, including the exact place of birth and the closest living relative in the birth country. Also, the alien status, if they were permanent or temporary residents, is very important, as we shall see moving on. Here's an example of an early passenger ship, 1899. You can see that there's sparse information here, but there are certainly names, ages, and at least country of origin. Here's an example of the columns in this 1899 passenger ship record. Remember what I said about the last residence. It may not be the home village. Here is an example of my grandfather, Ioannis Kostakos. Look at how his name, Ioannis, was spelled. We can see that he's age 23. It gives us a little bit of information about him. Note the last residence is Pirae or Piraeus, which was not his home village. From this record, I get a clue that my grandfather traveled to Piraeus and from there worked for a while before he got on the boat to come to America. Note also who's on the ship with your ancestor. Here there are several people, all of whom are relatives, all are from the same village of Ios Ioannis from which my grandfather left. These are important clues to help you determine if the person that you're seeing on the manifest is indeed your ancestor. Let's move ahead a few years to 1914. Look at all the additional information that's now being requested. There are 29 columns of information asked of the immigrant, including, let's look at these in red, the name and address of the nearest relative or friend from the immigrant's country, who he's joining in the U.S., the name of that individual and their full address, and, very important, their place of birth. From 1914, let's look at this record from Dimitrios Papagiannakos. We see he's age 18. We see in red his last residence is Ios Ioannis, Greece. Doesn't tell us which Ios Ioannis, but we have a village name. It gives us his father's name, Nikolaos. Very, very important information. It tells us he had not been in the U.S. previously. He's going to his brother Grigorios, who lives in Hoboken, and finally that he was born in Ios Ioannis. Also on this ship were several people that from his village that came over with him. It's unusual that an ancestor would have come completely alone. Certainly the earliest ones did, but as time moved on, they did come with others from their village. It's important at this juncture to discuss why names were not changed at Ellis Island. This is a prevalent myth that causes a lot of misinformation from people who believe that their ancestor's name is the name that they came over to the U.S. using, but that may not have been the name that they boarded the ship with. Let's go through the process. When your ancestor went to the port of embarkation, there was a ship manifest that had to be filled out with every person on the ship. Your immigrant ancestor is the one who gave that information. He answered some questions, and that manifest was given to the ship captain, who in turn carried it across the ocean and presented it to U.S. immigration officials upon arrival. Now, the U.S. officials used that manifest to check off every single person, and that person had to answer the 29 questions the same way that they answered them at the port of embarkation. There were professional interpreters who could speak the languages of all these immigrants. So consequently, the name that your ancestor gave, the name that's on that manifest, it was not changed at Ellis Island. That's the name your ancestor gave when they got on the boat. And remember, if your ancestor was not admitted into the U.S., the steamship company had to pay for his return voyage on that ship back to the country. So these questions were asked in a manner in which they tried to ensure that the most accurate information was given. Where you can find passenger ship records today, all over the internet on these major websites. Some of these are paid websites, so check with your local library and your local family history center, because many have free access to these paid sites. Let's move on now to naturalization records. Naturalization was a two-step process. The first step was a declaration of intention, or a first paper as they're known, which was filed after the immigrant was in this country for 5 years. Step 2 was that the immigrant had to file a petition before the court to request naturalization, and this was filed 2 to 7 years after he filed his declaration. Before 1906, your ancestor went to any court of record which could grant U.S. citizenship, and consequently, the state archives or the regional national archives office for that state would have those records. After 1906, your ancestor still could go to any court. However, all courts were required to forward copies of naturalization documents to what was then the INS and what is today USIS. Unfortunately, some of those courts did not comply, so you may still have to go to your state archive office or your national archive regional office to see if the naturalization records are held there. Remember, if a person filed a declaration of intention but did not complete the process, he remained an alien. Now, why did our ancestors go through the trouble and the expense to become naturalized citizens? Many of them were entrepreneurs. They owned their own businesses, so they needed liquor and other licenses in order to operate those businesses. Some of them perhaps maybe wanted to take advantage of the Homestead Act and get free land that the United States was giving out. They needed to be citizenships for that. They wanted to vote, and of course, they were proud of their new citizenship in their new country and wanted to become formal natural citizens to exhibit that pride and to make sure that their children and their descendants also remain citizens. Census records of 1900, 1910, 1920, and 1930 ask for naturalization status. So you may see AL for alien, NA for naturalized, and PA meaning first papers were filed. These are important clues to help you know whether your ancestor had filed papers at that point in that census record. Here's an example of my grandfather's declaration of intention. It was filed in 1931. This has a lovely picture of him. It has his signature, and it also has important information for us. It tells me that my ancestor declared he was age 51, born in St. John's, Greece, and he gives a birth date of April 5th, 1879. But there's more information than just about him. It gives us his wife's information, when they were married, when she was born and where, when she entered the U.S., the names of their children, my grandfather's last foreign residence, which here he identifies the village more precisely to be St. John's, Sparta, not just St. John's, Greece. It also tells us that he came in April 23rd, 1899, and the name of the ship, Lagashon. 2 years later, in 1933, my grandfather filed this petition. It was actually in the same court, the U.S. District Court, Eastern District of New York, which is where Brooklyn was. Here he says he was born in Sparta, Greece, April 5th, 1879. So you can begin to see sometimes the information may change from one document to another. It does give us information on my grandmother, their children's names. Interestingly enough, here he says he immigrated to the U.S. from unknown. And we do have a verification of the name that he entered, his date, and the vessel on this as well. This is my grandfather's certificate arrival. It verifies he came in April 23rd, 1899, and the ship was La Garçon. This is his oath of allegiance, making him a formal citizen of the United States. And I can only imagine his pride when he signed his name on this document. Now, you may have found Babu's record, but what about Yaya's? Where's her naturalization record, and why can you not find it? You need to understand that there was a law that was passed regarding derivative naturalization. The word derive means it comes from somewhere else, not from the original source. So women became citizens automatically if they married a U.S. citizen when they first came over here. Now, for many Greek immigrant women, this was not the normal case. Many of them came over because they were matched to other immigrant men who perhaps at that point had not yet become a citizen. If their husbands obtained citizenship, then they became citizens automatically under their husbands. Children under age 18 automatically became citizens when their fathers were naturalized. Where can you find naturalization records? Look for the nearest courthouses where your ancestors lived. This means that you need to track them. Your ancestor could have landed in New York, settled in Queens, started his naturalization process in the municipal court there, then perhaps he could have moved to Philadelphia and finished his naturalization process in a federal court there. They could have filed in any court, they could have filed in any area where they lived. So check the local courts where they were living, and these websites on this screen will also give you ideas of some online sites where you can try searching for their naturalization record. I'd like to talk now about alien registrations. This is a record source that is not commonly known or understood, but it is really critical for our Greek ancestors. The Alien Registration Act of 1940 was passed by the United States government as a national security measure. We had just entered World War II, and the government wanted to know every single individual who was not a U.S. citizen. So they had to register if they were 14 years old and older, if they were going to stay in the US for more than a month. They had to be fingerprinted as well as registered. 5.5 million aliens registered between 1940 and 1944. This picture came from the National Archives. Look at that paperwork. Over 5 million alien registration forms were being processed. The alien had to carry a small card with his identification on it at all times, like we carry our driver's license today. Every year they had to report their address. They would go to the post office, fill out a card, and that was sent to the INS. These files are genealogical gems for us. They have photographs, they have naturalization documents. The applications required all kinds of information for the immigrant to fill out. I found marriage documents, birth documents, other affidavits in these files. So let's take a look. How would you know if your ancestor has an alien registration file? Remember, the act was passed in 1940. So the first place to go is the 1940 US Census. And in the column next to place of birth is this skinny little narrow column called citizenship that most people don't even recognize is there, but it's critical. You can see on line 1 that there is an N and an A, meaning naturalized. On line 2 is an AL, meaning alien. This tells us that the person on line 1 was a naturalized citizen and would not have an alien registration file. The person on line 2 was an alien. He had to register with the United States, and therefore he must have some type of file. Here's a file for my grandaunt Bertha Costianes. There are 48 pages of documents in Bertha's file, and I'd like to show you a few of them for 2 reasons. Number 1, I want you to watch out for the various names that Bertha gives in some of these documents. And number 2, the varying information as to her place of birth and her residence in Greece. So the first thing we notice is her citizenship of naturalization. This document was given only to the person who became a citizen. This is a duplicate document that the US government put in her alien registration file. Let's look at this form. Bertha here, under the beginning, where she's listing her names, gives us 3 names that she was known as in this country: Bertha Manos, Bertha Costianes, and Bertha Costas. None of those are her maiden name. The second underlined red information is her place of birth: Sparta, Tharpon, Greece. Those of you from Sparta know there is no such place as Tharpon in the Peloponnese. So immediately we see Bertha's giving us varied information and even incorrect information. On this particular document, I have underlined here the village of Gorica, Sparta, Greece, which, after further investigation, I have learned is indeed her birth village. On this document, notice all the information that's handwritten. She spoke this information to someone who wrote it down because she certainly could not read or write English. And the information is about herself, her husband, her children, and other interesting facts about her, including, the name that she came into in the United States, which here she says in the middle is Bertha Manos. This form, which is an INS form, asks for any aliases that she was known by, including her maiden name. And for the first time, I see the name Voulomanos of Bertha. Voulomanos does and is her maiden name, because in the second column, it is her father's name, Athanasios Voulomanos, and her mother's name, Calliope Costas. However, let's go back to Bertha's name. Voulomanos could be her maiden name for her surname, but certainly Bertha was not her given name, was it? There is no such name as Bertha in Greek. Maybe the file will tell us what her original given name was. In Bertha's file, we find baptismal records for 3 of her 4 children. This is important because on the left-hand side, that's written in Greek, we have the name of the parents of the child, John Costianes and Bertha Costianes. But look, it says Ioanu Costiani from Gorica, Lacedaemono, and underneath it, Panayota. So we have learned that Bertha's first name of Costianes in Greek is Panayota, and that she is from Gorica. Comparing the 3 children's birth records is very interesting to see how the information varies a little bit from each of these 3 records. Some of the other documents that I have found in other alien registration files are wonderful documents from Greece, such as this one. This pistopitiko is an affidavit of birth and residency for the village of Theologos. It was issued to Hariklia Zacharakis, who was the wife of Yorgos. It gives us her father's name, Paraskevas Bourtsos. Aha, okay, I now have her maiden name and I have her father's name. It gives me her birth date. It gives me her village. It tells me that her husband is a farmer. And it also gives me an additional record that I can check, the town register for the village of Theologos. If I go to family number 45 and I look at line 8, I will find Hariklia there. Hariklia's file also had a marriage certificate issued by the metropolis. It gives us the marriage date. It gives us the church and the village that she was married in, her husband's full name, and her name, maiden name for the surname, and first given names, Hariklia Paraskevi Voritsu. It also provides another critical piece of information that this is the second marriage for both Yorgos and Hariklia. Again, this came from Greece, from the metropolis. This information was in Hariklia's alien registration file. How do you know if your ancestor has an A file? Remember, a couple of screens back, I showed you the 1940 census that had the citizenship column highlighted in red. Find your ancestor in the 1940 census. Look to see if they were an alien, naturalized, or had filed their first papers. You can also go to the National Archives catalog at this URL, type in an ancestor's name, and if there's an alien registration file, it will come up with what you see highlighted in blue in the box on the bottom. This one says alien case file for Irene Kostakos. It gives us her date of birth. It tells us that she's from Greece, but there's no other identifying information. So you would have to order that file to find out if it is indeed your ancestor. And where do you find A files? If your alien ancestor was born 99 years ago or sooner, that file would be held at USIS. If your ancestor was born more than 100 years ago, USIS should send the file to the National Archives and it would be in their Kansas City office. However, if the National Archives does not have the file, it may still be at USIS, so you may need to check both government offices. In conclusion, passenger ship, naturalization, and alien registration records are truly critical keys to help you find your ancestor's original surname and village of origin. If you can find these records, they will save you hours of researching in other records.